In the summer of 2026, archaeologists working at Søften in Denmark uncovered a vast Viking Age textile site with more than 80 pit houses and traces of flax processing, a quiet discovery that softens the old image of the Viking as only a raider. Cloth rarely survives as easily as iron or stone, yet it lay close to every part of life in the north, from the warmth of a household to the movement of ships, and from the work of women's hands to the wealth of trading towns. In 2026, near Søften, outside Aarhus, archaeologists opened a broad patch of ground, nearly 100,000 square meters in all, and found not a single dramatic monument, but the patient outline of work repeated over generations. The site, dated roughly from AD 600 to 950, held more than 80 pit houses, those half-sunken little buildings that so often gather around craft. Among them lay evidence for the processing of flax, enough to suggest something more organized than the ordinary weaving of one household at a time. It is a quiet kind of discovery, yet an important one. At Søften, textile making appears not as an afterthought to Viking life, but as a practiced and specialized labor, rooted in place, returning season after season like plowing, lambing, or the repair of boats before spring journeys. Seen in the longer light of history, Søften belongs to the transition from the late Iron Age into the Viking Age, reminding us that cloth was already essential long before the raid on Lindisfarne in 793 fixed northern seafarers in popular memory. The making of textiles lay deeper than raiding, deeper even than trade, in the basic architecture of society. Sheep provided wool for most garments, and perhaps for some sailcloth as well, while flax gave linen. In some Scandinavian settings, hemp and nettle fibers also entered the work. All of it began far from the loom. Fields had to be sown and tended, sheep shorn in their season, fibers retted, cleaned, teased apart, and spun into thread fine or coarse according to need. Only then could the threads be carried indoors, where order slowly emerged from labor that was both repetitive and highly skilled. Inside the workshop, the tools still speak clearly. The standing warp-weighted loom rose like a wooden frame against the wall, its hanging weights keeping the vertical threads under steady tension, using gravity itself to make a fabric possible. Around it lay spindle whorls for spinning, loom weights of clay, iron shears for cutting, and the dim shelter of pit houses where weaving could continue out of the wind. There's something almost architectural in these interiors, as if cloth were being built rather than merely made. The National Museum of Denmark describes ordinary Viking clothing as locally made from wool and flax, usually woven by women, and that plain fact opens a wide view into the household, where labor, skill, and status were expressed not only in weapons or land, but in the patient command of fiber and thread. The same world could also produce splendor. In the early 9th century Oseberg ship burial in Norway, preserved textiles and tools show weaving at its most refined. Patterned bands, fine cloth, and work whose prestige was unmistakable in its own right, not just as background to richer objects. In the years that followed, scientific dye analysis of Danish Viking Age textiles has widened the old image of a brown and gray north. Alongside local colors, some elite fabrics carried imported luxury dyes such as kermes and cochineal, small traces of far-off landscapes folded into northern cloth. Even color, then, could speak of rank and connection. Before cloth ever entered a market or crossed the sea, it had already gathered fields, animals, weather, memory, and the long discipline of many hands. . From the workshop, the story of cloth opens onto the seaway. Textiles did not only warm bodies or soften interiors, they also made movement possible. A Viking ship needed oak, tar, rope, and iron, yet every long crossing also depended on a great skin of woven wool held against the wind. Sailcloth, whose strength and careful finishing were as consequential as the hull beneath it. In that sense, the loom stood close to the shoreline. Some archaeologists return here to Søften with this larger horizon in mind, suggesting that production on such a scale may have supplied sailcloth as well as clothing and household textiles. The unusually dense concentration of tools and workshop traces supports that possibility, even if the exact balance of what was made there remains under study. It is a useful reminder that the labor of spinning and weaving did not end at the farm gate. It could reach, thread by thread, into the mechanics of travel itself. Further south, at Hedeby, the great trading settlement at the base of Jutland, that connection becomes easier to see. Active from the 8th to the 11th centuries, Hedeby has yielded evidence for a wide range of textile production, and UNESCO describes the town, together with the nearby Dannevirke, as central to maritime trade networks linking northern and western Europe. Around its harbor and streets, one can imagine a quieter abundance than the older tales of Viking life often allow. Wool and linen, dyed cloth, glass beads, silver, silk, soapstone, cornstones, wine, and other goods passing through market towns such as Hedeby, Ribe, Birka, and Kaupang. Among these, textiles were both necessity and distinction, packed as useful goods, worn as signs of means, and altered by the taste of places far beyond the north. Rich graves and settlement finds preserve that contrast with particular clarity. Alongside ordinary local cloth, sturdy and serviceable, appear imported silks and decorative influences from abroad, the small luxuries of contact and ambition. Clothing in the Viking Age could therefore say more than warmth or modesty. It could speak of rank, of travel, of a household's reach. In daily life, this was not the costume book north of horned helmets and theatrical furs, but a more grounded world. Women in strap dresses over linen or wool underlayers, men in wool tunics, cloaks, and trousers, and both sexes fastening cloth with brooches, beads, and woven bands that made fabric part of visible identity from farmstead to harbor. Seen this way, the society remembered for swift raids also rested on slower arrangements of work. Seasonal shearing, spinning in dim light, weaving through winter, storing finished cloth, loading it for transport, exchanging it in busy waterside towns. All of this belonged to the same world as the ship under sail. Much of that labor was domestic, much of it patient, and much of it is easy to overlook because cloth decays while weapons survive. Yet the trading world of the Vikings was held together not only by wood and metal, but by fibers twisted, dyed, counted, and woven into forms sturdy enough to cross the sea. For a long time, textiles sat at the edge of the Viking story, partly because they sit so precariously in the ground. Wool, linen, and plant fibers decay in ordinary soil. They survive most often in unusual circumstances, pressed into graves, sealed in waterlogged harbor layers, or preserved as tiny mineralized scraps against metal brooches and tools. Archaeology, especially in its earlier generations, naturally built its grander pictures from what endured more readily. Ships, swords, silver, scales, whetstones, and hoards whose outlines remain clear after 1,000 years. The result was not exactly false, but it was uneven. A world once clothed in woven matter came down to us, looking hard-edged and metallic, as if the north had been made chiefly of oak, iron, and treasure, when in daily life it was also made of fleece, teased apart by hand, of dyed yarn drying in cool air, of loom weights hanging in ordered rows beside the hearth. In the years that followed, that imbalance began to soften. Projects such as the National Museum of Denmark's Fashioning the Viking Age have drawn together surviving fragments, spindle whorls, loom weights, needles, dye traces, and microscopic fiber analysis to rebuild something of the lost wardrobe and working landscape of the period. From these patient studies, clothing in the Viking world appears less uniform and far more articulate than older popular images allowed. Garments cut and layered in different ways, fibers chosen for use and status, colors ranging from the plain and practical to the carefully saturated. The material world of the North becomes, through this work, more domestic and also more skilled. One begins to sense not a costume for raiders, but a fabric culture maintained by memory, dexterity, and long practice, in which households and specialists alike understood the value of twist, weave, finish, and repair. Around Aarhus, this fuller picture gathers particular weight. Burials, silver bracelets, settlement traces, and now the Søften textile complex together suggest an Eastern Jutland landscape that was dense, prosperous, and closely connected, with production, exchange, and status lying near one another, rather than in separate compartments of farm, market, and expedition. Textiles help sharpen the chronology of that prosperity as well. Before kingdoms were fully consolidated, cloth was already tying households to workshops, workshops to towns, and towns to the sea lanes beyond them, helping sustain the economic ground from which larger powers could grow. Some caution remains necessary. Archaeologists can measure fibers, dyes, tools, and building remains more securely than intention. An exact output, ownership, or control must often remain provisional. Yet the scale is plain enough to rebalance the story. In museums, in reconstructed looms, and in new excavations where the smallest fragment is treated as evidence rather than residue, Viking cloth has become visible again. With it, the civilization itself comes into softer focus, less a blur of raids than a patient northern world of wool, flax, color, and practiced hands. When the ships have gone and the halls are silent, cloth remains as one of the gentlest ways into the Viking world. It brings the age down from saga and stereotype to wool, weather, labor, and the patient rhythm of daily life, where civilization was not only sailed and fought for, but spun, woven, worn, and mended.